folks, today I'm going to install a Legrand Adorne paddle dimmer switch with a locator light inside, so you can see it when the light is off. You can find the switch in the dark basically with that light shining through it. One thing to mention, absolutely, I've played with a few of these, been frustrated with some of them. Some have worked very, very well. One of the biggest things is if it is a switch that needs constant power while the lights are off, you must have a neutral in your box that you're going to install the switch into. If you don't have a neutral wire and the switch needs constant power, it's not really going to work out well for you. So in today's installation, we have just a hot in and a hot out basically. So there's no constant power at the switch. So what I mean by that is with this switch here, you will physically have to click the switch so mechanically inside it's going to move. Whereas if you tried to install, say, a touch switch or some type of switch that has a non-mechanical working part that you physically move and it is done electromechanically after the fact, without that neutral, it's not going to work. There's a couple switches out on the market that use a two-wire system and constant power can be supplied to them, but you need incandescent lights so that basically the flow can come back through the bulbs and keep power at the switch. The reason for the incandescent only is if you have an LED or some of the compact fluorescent lamps, for example, while the switch is off, current is still going to be going to the switch essentially, and certain light fixtures or bulbs may stay on very, very dimly while the lights are off. So you don't really want that. So in this case, I would love to have a touch switch or some type of a smart switch or Wi-Fi connected switch or whatnot. But being that I have LED lights in the room that we're installing this into, and there's no neutral wire in the box, I pretty much have to go with a switch like this. Now the manufacturer admittedly isn't that great about telling you much about that until you look at their instruction manual or until you physically look at the back of the switch. So there's no way really quick to tell this switch essentially needs constant power or not running to it while the lights are off. But if we switch it over on the back, there is no white or neutral area to connect. There's only your hot and your one pole, which is what we're going to be using. If you've got more than one switch that controls the same light, then you can get into using the three-way, which is all explained in the instructions. But to save you a whole bunch of heartache, headache, whatever you want to call it, be very careful if the box that you're installing the switch into does not have a neutral. That's a big thing. And some of these switches, again, not very clear on the outside, come with the locator light and some do not. One I've purchased was a wave switch by the same brand, had this in it, and then this switch, for example, I don't believe has it in it, so I purchased that separately. Anyways, enough of the small talk, let's move on. Okay, sorry about the long intro there. I just really had to get that neutral wire problem off my back to, again, save you some time. I've tried to play that same game where I bought a switch without checking what was in the box, and lo and behold, you pull the outlet off and you don't have the wires you need there to install it and make it work correctly. So anyways, make sure you're getting the right switch. Certainly doesn't hurt to pull the switch off or out of the box and have a look at the wires first, and then go out and purchase the switch that is going to work for what you want it to do and for what it's capable of doing. So anyways, to get this installation done, one thing I didn't mention before is you're going to need that Legrand Adorne plate or cover for the installation to work. Again, not something that, at least to me, by initially looking at the front of the packaging, was made very clear. So just be careful of that. It's in the top right corner. I've already unboxed that part. It's going to come with the plate itself that the switch clips into and grounds to the box, and then there's a multitude of different color and let's say texture or material covers that will go around the box and trim your switch in. A few of the tools that you'll need are probably just a Phillips screwdriver and a flathead would probably get you by. I do like to have the screwdriver with a couple extra bits, especially when it comes to the screws that mount the switch in. There's a number 1 Robertson spot, which I prefer over using the flathead, just little things like that. The rest of the tools here are a voltage tester, like a non-contact voltage tester, a pair of strippers, which has a convenient hook inside if you need to open up insulation of any wiring, as well as some strippers. A little flashlight there, which certainly helps when you're working in the dark. Any type of side cutters or wire snips. Use a Leatherman Surge. Hopefully Surge has nothing to do with the job here. And then we have some Moretz or wire nuts. That should be everything we pretty well need to make it happen. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do before starting any electrical work is, of course, turn the power off to the circuit you're working on. So, sometimes the circuit might be labeled, sometimes it might not. So if it's really far away, you can have someone tell you when that circuit is off in the room that they're in. Or some people have used a loud radio plugged into that circuit, and whenever you hear the music stop, you know you should have got the right circuit. Of course, always use a voltage tester or another kind of meter to make sure before you actually start to work on the stuff that it is not live. So anyways, we're just gonna try a few things out until it goes dark in here. That's not the one. That's not the one. That's not the one. Still not it. That was our furnace we could hear. Suppose if I read that, I would have known. Okay, so it went dark. That should be the guy. We'll test the wiring and make sure that it's safe to work on. Okay, so once the power is turned off, you can remove the wall plate. It's quite simple. Just take off the visible screws, or if there is a screwless wall plate, typically there's just a few clips behind that you can pry up with a little tool, flathead, or even a plastic type of tool, so that you don't mar the wall up depending on the switch cover that you've got. So once that's finished, then you can pull the switch out and proceed to have a look at how to remove the wires and what you're working with inside the box. So let's go to that now. Okay, so once you get the switch cover off and you've pulled the switch out, which is just another couple screws holding it in on the box here, then you can have a look at how it's wired up. So typically there's going to be 2 black or a black and a white, and we at this point are just going to assume that the black is hot and the white is a neutral wire, but we're going to test for that in a moment. So you could, if you really wanted, undo these and actually reuse the hooks if that's the type of switch you're installing. For us, obviously, it's the Legrand switch where it goes straight in. So the best bet is to cut the wire and start with a clean, fresh area. Of course, you have to have enough wire to do so. If not, you may have to actually get some more and pigtail it, or have an electrician actually come in and help you out if you've got a finished wall where it's all blocking where the wiring goes. Anyway, let's cut the switch out and go from there. Okay, so just to make sure before you actually start working on it that there's definitely no power going to that circuit at all, I've got a voltage tester here. I will put a voltage tester in the description, a link to one. Anyways, you just go really close to the wire, or you can actually take that little blade and put it in an outlet if that's what you're working on, and just check. There's that little flashing light every now and again to tell you that it is working and it's turned on. I always like to go check it with a live wire anyways, just to hear it and see it working fully, so that I know for a fact. But right now it looks like there's no power going through these wires, so we should be safe to go ahead and work. So remove the old switch. You'd always just cut the old switch right off if you really wanted to. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to cut these right off. Sorry, some good shadows here without any power in the room. And then I'm going to strip them back, which the switch has a little strip gauge on it. So, when you look at the switch, there's a small little gauge right here, and this actually shows you how much wire needs to be stripped for it to be inserted correctly but not have any wiring exposed. So when you're ready to go, that's the length you want to strip the wire to before you proceed. Okay, so if there's a spot here that's kinked, I like to just try to flatten it a little bit first. It's not really too bad, but we'll just flatten it a bit. It will make stripping the insulation off slightly easier, as well as it will go in to the switch a little bit better. So again, referring to that strip gauge on the back of the switch, we don't really want any more than about 1/4 inch, and if you want to be really sure about it, you could hold it up again. So we want it right to about there. Pretty standard typically for most applications, but to be safe, we're going to go right to where it tells us to. And if you're really concerned, you can go and check that on your gauge, but I can tell that looks pretty darn close. And we can just use that to kind of gauge where we want the other one to be as well. Might be a little short. I think that should be decent. Okay, so because we're not exactly sure what wire is what, because we didn't originally install this, we're going to put a couple wire nuts on, just for safety's sake. And then we're going to test what wire is actually hot. Okay, with the power back on, we're just going to use that voltage tester that we talked about before to see what wire is hot and what one's neutral. So look at that, it's actually different than what we would have expected. Most of the time you're going to find that black is hot, but not always, so you do have to be careful. In our case, we would have miswired it. Okay, so we turn the power off. I always like to just do a double check. And we're ready to work. So in this particular application, we've got a wall plate here that the switch must clip into, and it says so like right from the manufacturer. So this is a ground that's hardwired right to this bezel, and you'll notice we don't have a ground or that third wire, but this does need to be grounded. Now I find it typically very difficult to try to ground this at the very back because there's such little room to work. So what I'm going to do is make a small ground pigtail, or not even really a pigtail if you will, being that a pigtail some people would consider has to come from a moret or a wire nut. But at the back of the box here, there's another screw that is connected because the ground wire is actually grounded at the box here. You just don't have a wire coming out. So as you can see, the ground wire that comes out of the main wire, you've got the black, the white, and then that ground is actually terminated to the back of the box. So being that the box is grounded, I'm going to use the screw here beside it to make my own ground wire, and then I can put the green wire coming from that plate to it and make life a little bit easier so that it's not super tight. That way I've got a little bit extra room to work. Okay, so to make my ground little jumper, I'm just going to use some spare 14-2 that I have laying around. You can pretty much strip if you wanted any 14 gauge wire or whatever is going to be the similar wire to what you have in the wall. This is 14-2 that it's wired with, so I'm going to use that same gauge. I'm just going to take this hook and draw it through here, and that'll just let me strip this insulation open, and then I can grab this bare piece of copper out of the middle, and that'll just be my ground wire here. So it certainly doesn't have to be as long as what I've got here. I'm just going to take, you know, a really quick eyed up measurement as far as it's going to be wrapped around that screw at the back, and then I want it to come out at least with some working room here, so I'll do a similar length to the wiring that's already come out. So we'll just trim that guy. So that guy will hook around the screw, tighten it down, and we'll be all set to go. So what I've done is I've put a little hook that's going to go under the head of the screw, and I've also put a 90 or close to a 90 on it because the screw is going to be at the back of the box, and then I'm not going to have to try to manipulate the wire while I'm trying to tighten the screw. It's pretty much already bent the way I want it to be, just like that. So I'm just going to undo the screw, wrap that hook around, and tighten down the screw. Okay, so the ground wire is wrapped around the screw and tightened down. The best way is to make your hook to the right, and as you tighten the screw down in a clockwise motion, it won't force the wire out. But whatever the case is, as long as you can get a hold of this wire and give it a really good solid tug, I like to make sure that it's tight and in there proper, so I'm satisfied with that. Okay, so before you start to wire the switch in, which I've probably done multiple times before with these style, you want to make sure that the plate is on first, because if you start to wire the switch on, the switch can't get through the plate from this side. It can only go in the plate one way, so you want to make sure the plate is done and ready and installed, and the last few wires can go in with the plate. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting there with everything wired up and you can't install it into the box. So make sure you put the plate on first. That's a nice hint for you so that you don't waste 5 minutes like I've done on some of these before. Alright, so this is like a multi-strand. Typically people say just hold it right up against here and use the moret to do the work. I like to twist it around a little bit and make sure it feels solid before I do that. I think either way, really, if you use the right morets for the gauge of wire you're using, either way will work okay. So I like to just take a little bit of that wire, put it around, grab a pair of pliers, make sure it's really solid, and there's, being it's multi-strand, some stuff that'll come out here and there. But if you've got a decent mechanical connection on that wire, the whole plate and everything will just hang right off of it. It's not like any kind of technological test or anything, but you know it's on there solidly if it's going to bear the whole weight of that. Take the wire nut Pop it on there clockwise, of course, until it's decently snug. And there we go. So we take the wiring. I just read the writing so I know what way to put it in. Sometimes it says top in really big writing on some manufacturers. This is just a matter of what direction the writing is, so I know what way. We'll pop the wires out for our switch. And being it's a pretty big switch to get back in this box, we're gonna have to try to tuck this ground wire in a fashion that's not gonna get in the way when we try to put our box in there. Then this should mate up to the wall, and you can run the existing screws, or you should have screws that come with this here just to keep the install clean, even though you're not actually going to see those at all. Okay, so let's grab the switch and get to it. Sometimes from the manufacturer, the connector comes almost all the way closed, so just make sure that you back off the screw a little bit and make sure you can look right down into the connector where you want the wire to go, or else you might be sitting there trying to push the wire in, but the connector's already shut. It should be pretty clear, but just throwing that out there for some of the folks that might not have realized. Now, we tested this as the hot wire before, so we're going to throw that in there. Now, if you did in fact use the strip gauge like we discussed earlier, you'll notice that when you connect the wire, that there's no exposed copper showing, so that way we know that there's going to be a good solid grab from the connector on the wire. There's not going to be any insulation under that connector, but there isn't going to be any exposed copper, so it keeps it nice and clean in the box. We'll give it a good solid tug. Okay, so the next thing is the one pole, but being that I'm going to use a locator light, I'm going to make a little pigtail for the one pole to go to that, and it will run alongside this. So the connector has 2 ports, but it's squeezed down by only 1 screw. So I'm going to make up a quick little pigtail and have that inserted before I try to tighten down the screw with this guy, or else I'm just going to have to undo it to redo the second wire there. So I'm just going to use some of the same gauge. Obviously, that was the whole point of making the pigtail, the 14 gauge that we've got. And I'm going to insert both my one pole from the wall and my one pole, which is going to go to the LED locator here. Make sure that they're both all the way in, no exposed conductor. Might be a little bit fun to hold those both together. You can bend it, manipulate it in a way where you can try to get them both in there at the same time. And of course, we always give it a good solid tug after. Make sure that everything's in there proper. Okay, so let's check it out. That one's decent. That one's decent. Everything's good. So there's really no need to have this type of length. I just did it for the sake of holding it at the time. I'm just going to make a bit of working room without it being extremely long, but not so short that a wire nut, no matter what I do with it, it's always going to be in my way when I go to push the switch into the box. So I'm going to do about half of that length or so. So let's just find a spot here. Strip this guy back. Just enough for that multi-strand wire from the locator light to be able to wrap around here. Nothing too serious, you don't have to follow the wire gauge for that. Just enough for it to get into the wire nut and have a solid connection. Okay, so even though this is super low current, little tiny LED, I still just follow the way I've always kind of done it and grab a pair of pliers and do that little bit of extra mechanical connection on it. before I moret it or wire nut it. Okay, so it doesn't matter. This guy is definitely bent, but it's okay. This doesn't matter either way. This can go the one way, this can go the other way. There's no, this has to go to the three-way, this has to go to the one pole, or whatever. It doesn't matter. So that's all set up. The only thing else left to do is hope that we've left enough length to get this guy all the way installed in there. And there's a little keyway, or a key and a keyhole. So basically there's only one way it's going to be able to fit in there, and then once you get that aligned, just go right to the end, and you can tell by the length of the LED and how far it goes in. There's really no more for it to be able to go. That way, when the light is off, this little guy is kind of like a window to the locator, and that's going to light up. So when it's completely dark, if everything is wired correctly, this will light up in the dark, and then I would imagine it will go off if we are going to use a three-way here. We'll see how it works when we're finished. Okay, so remember, sometimes you do have to loosen that screw off to make sure the connector is going to allow you to install. Now this might be a little bit easier to not have the strands go all over the place on you if you give it just a little twist. Insert it all the way. Now being it's already pre-stripped from the same manufacturer that makes the switch, you would hope that, being this is their instruction, it would be a good length to not be exposed but to still get a good connection. And that should pretty much be about it there. So it's just a matter of manipulating the wires and doing what you can so that the switch is going to get back in here and clip in securely. Now these switches are quite a bit bigger in some cases than standard ones, but they're being put into a standard box, so it can be a little bit fun. Don't force anything too hard. It might take a little bit of effort, but just bend a wire that way, bend a wire the other way, do what you've got to do, and see if you can make it all fit in there and get this guy clipped in. If it really feels like it's too tight and you're really too far away here, you've got to have a look and see what else you might be able to do. You can get another moret down here. You certainly don't want to snap off the locator light or do any damage to anything in there. So there's only so much effort you want to put into it. Okay, we're getting pretty close there. Usually it's got that authoritative type click, but it's definitely securely in there. So that's decent. We will turn power on and see what we get. Okay, we've just put power back on and we'll give it a shot. Now, if it is working correctly, might not be that easy to see, but that locator light, when it's completely dark, should light up. We will flick on the light switch. Perfect, everything's working. We'll notice the way that we've installed it here, the locator light is not on. You could hook it up a multitude of different ways if you want the light to always be on or whatever the case is. I went with that idea: when you shut it off, the locator light's on, and when you turn it on, the locator light's off. So I think that's quite cool, and we'll try out the dimmer. Perfect. So we know everything's working properly, at which point we will install the last little piece. Ideally, you'd want it to be right side up, so there's a little word here, Legrand, or however you say it, and that is right side up. We'll pop this over. A little bit of pressure here and there. Make sure it fully clips in. There's 4 or 6 clips, I think, on these, and if you see any gap between it and the wall, then it's probably not clipped all the way in. Sometimes there's a gap right around the middle, and you can just kind of run your finger down it or click all the way around, and then once there's no gap, you're good to go. All finished. So miles ahead of that 80s looking switch that was there before, and now we've gained dimming capabilities as well. So any questions, concerns, anything like that, ask away and I'll see if I can help you out. I really do appreciate you sticking with me through the whole thing. Thank you so much. And like I say, comment. You can subscribe to me. I'll be coming out with all sorts of new videos in the next little while, and certainly hope that you like it. If you dislike it, don't be one of those guys that just put the thumbs down, or girls. Actually leave a comment and tell me how you think I could have improved or what you didn't like about it. It's the only way I'll be able to know how to make it better for you. Thanks again. Take care.